non-gendered workplace, look at tackling a hegemonic masculinity, which is kind of a scary term, but essentially it's a practice or a structure that legitimizes and justifies one group being dominant over another. So in this case, we're proposing a potential male-dominated workplace, and hopefully come away with sort of instill a pedagogy, critical pedagogy approach to outdoor education. So now, when I first looked at this was quite challenging for me because, you know, I'm privileged, I'm male, so maybe I wouldn't have maybe picked up on many things. So the question I had to ask myself, was the outdoor education landscape gendered? And there's definitely been research done by a guy called Senior 2018, so this year, very current and relevant. And they surveyed over 52 companies, over 160 individuals, and they found that there was significantly fewer women in outdoor education in the UK, particularly in an adventure sector. And they looked at things like national governing bodies, clubs, and these different entities. And on average, although the numbers were also lower in single figures, from 25% to 35% of the members were female. And the Sports English survey also found that out of all the active participants in the UK, 35% of them were also female. So there's definitely some correlation. Conversely, I said I conducted a little bit of my own research in our own cohort of students here in our BA, and we found that there was actually more women working within our workplaces than men. That was very interesting. However, there were stereotypical norms. So in particular, there were more men working in adventure activities or sporting category. One could argue technical skill, go further and say hard skill. We'll get into that a little bit. And then we found there was more women working in an educational context in terms of school-based programs like forest schools, ecology, and one could argue interpersonal skills were fundamental to this, or again, soft skills. So this journey for me, I had found out after over 11 years in outdoor education that hard and soft skills were actually terms that were sexist. So we're going to come back to that a little bit later on. Fantastic for me to look into it and find out why. It is very interesting. So that was kind of my own little research, but was I think super interesting was that 6 out of 8 of the activity managers, gender acted as a precursor or an indicator to the predominant gender in the workplace. So there was more female activity managers. In this case, there was more male participants in those categories. However, the numbers were skewed, interesting, by one workplace that did predominantly hire more women. There was a female activity manager there. And what was also very interesting is there was no hard skill technical, how would you say, focus. That it was in-house training, so the skill was open to everybody, not just those that might have had an upper hand, and we'll talk about that in a while. There's other barriers that would stop individuals coming into outdoor education. A lot of them have been researched in terms of the female context, so technical skill development, gender role socialization, we're talking about positive female role models, athlete sexualization and use of language. Some very important topics, very pivotal to this sort of poster. But I want to focus in on technical skill development and gender role socialization. Gender role socialization applying to both male and female. Very important, because if we look back up at our graph, we can see there is a divide. Not just women maybe in one side of things, maybe men on the other side need to also be looked at. But gender role socialization, there's a lot of research to say that young boys, young girls are socialized differently, particularly when it comes to things like risk and technical skills. Research has also shown that boys are encouraged more, even pushed into those categories, and often young girls, if they've received an injury while doing these activities, their attitude, parental attitudes have changed drastically. Zoom out and scroll up and down. Poster design flaw. And again, okay. I might come down to here. So some of those categories are very important. Like I said, that gender role socialization, leading also into that technical skill development. And here in Ireland, where we have a predominant outdoor adventure context, especially for us in the room, there might be less of an opportunity for women in their lifetime to have expanded on the skills that men might have been pushed through from a younger age. So that's really important. So Smith came up with a framework, or at least had a thesis on it, a feminist outdoor leadership approach. And I'm very aware I've just gone and said the F word, feminism. I know it's a tough one for a lot of people, but with this poster, it is about a gendered, a non-gendered workplace. So it is about looking at equality for both. So Smith proposed 6 steps. I've actually left out the 6th step because it's all about transferring this learning, arguably, and it is contested that learning is transferable. And it is, of course, theoretically a fundamental part of outdoor education. If it's practiced or theorized about, who's to say? However, the first 5 steps is very interesting because I think these things are very much evident in practice, not always, but potentially, but also very much in theory. So if we look at the horizontally shared power and space in our workplace context, in our workplace context, we might think about that in terms of role division and rotation. So I know I work in several workplaces where there'll be one individual who always do the technical roles, and there might be another individual who will do less technical roles, and it's never rotated. So rotating a role division not only encourages positive role models, but also development of skill and actually recognizing that you've developed your skill. But it also, for our participants in our courses, can see that we might be operating outside gender norms. So rotating those roles, but also non-territorial space. So in outdoor education, we often look at circle ups, like reflections and debriefs, where we don't have a dominant figure luring over somebody else and ruling the reflection style. Emotionality, something I get caught saying a lot as my little joke. Some people go, what are we going to do? And I say, we'll sit down and talk about our feelings. Yeah, so there's a point I need to work on because, you know, women, there's a lot of evidence to show that women has long documented that there's more than risk and skill. I'm not saying that men don't, but there is more than risk and skill when it comes to adventure. And again, outdoor education has a lot of things, journaling, poetry, writing, that allow people to not only express themselves differently on an emotional level, but also in the sense that we can challenge that hegemonic masculinity where men can operate outside that masculinity, that hegemonic masculinity that maybe stops them from being outside that norm. And as well, to look at that emotionality, which is fed from the aesthetic, possibly also that emotion, but also the spiritual aspect of being in outdoor education. So it's not just physical, it's not just conquering a mountain or a cliff. Critical relationship building, essentially more building a relationship with the individuals. It's also about understanding the relationship of how things work in the world, where our place is, and what's influenced us in our thinking. So critical inquiry is very, very clever there. And that's where the idea of inclusive reflections and debriefs that encompass all perspectives, which is probably in theory done. I wonder if that's really done in practice by a lot of practitioners. Empowering communication, arguably maybe aim more at men. You know, we have a lot of terminology, like I said, this hard and soft skill that is sexist. I can put my hand up, I've been using it for 10 years. Likewise, saying women and men. When I say men and women or boys and girls, I always put them first. And if we were to look at the top of that poster, you know, in a Western world, we read right from left, and we have men on the right and women on the left. So we'll acknowledge men first. And if 35% of our participants in our, not only as our staff, but our participants in these courses might be women, we might need to put them first to show that they're welcomed. So it's just kind of thinking about not only our language, but how we phrase things. And we saw today, you know, from several people, we used the word human instead of person, or instead of male or female. So there's a lot to think there about our wording. Conscious skill and confidence development, keyword being conscious. So teaching and operating outside our gender role socialization. So if you had, for example, a female staff member setting up the climbing wall, or if you had a male staff member doing the cooking and bushcraft, those sort of things that not only do we do ourselves, which allow ourselves opportunity to gain confidence and skill and recognize our learning, also our staff might learn that as well, but our participants get to see this. Again, feeds straight back into positive role models. So that framework, I think, would sit nicely into an outdoor education context. And to kind of think about, well, why would we do these things? Well, there's been a lot of research on, you know, the benefits of outdoor education. There's been research focusing on segregated groups and female groups. So, for example, Barr, Wilson, and Roberts found amazing positive sort of self-image that was developed for women working on segregated female courses. I'd like to say, well, what about men as well? What about men operating in an outdoor educational context? What's the barriers for them? I suppose the big question is outdoor education can't, I'm not saying it should or shouldn't, but cannot offer a non-gendered outdoor education experience or landscape, how we cope in a gender fluid and multicultural landscape. Thank you very much.